Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC. Call 0345 6060973.
What have we got? 9 minutes before 9 is the time. A lot of you are reacting to the conversation with Jeremy Hunt over these shortages with the NHS in England. I'm sure there are shortages across the United Kingdom. We'll return to those calls in just a moment. But let's come to other stories. Now, when I reviewed the newspapers in the first hour of the show, and if we've learned anything from the pandemic, it is not to make predictions. Don't make predictions. But it does appear the mood is changing. We have lift-off. Britain is perhaps a little overbuoyant for the Daily Mail. The Times boost for holidays as travel tests scrapped. Metro go with the flow. So is it possible that whatever the new norm from which this country will emerge once we've all had our vaccinations, is it the fact that we are now, at least, is it in sight? Well, at least regards travel. Who better to turn to than Conservative MP and Transport Secretary Grant Shapps, who joins me now. Happy New Year to you, Mr. Shapps. Yeah, are we at least approaching the end of the tunnel as regards foreign travel? Good morning.
Morning. Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I think test-free travel should be our ultimate destination. We're not quite there, but we're only now going to be asking people to do a single lateral flow test after they return. Quarantine's gone, the pre-departure test has gone, the PCR test has gone. It will certainly make it a lot easier for people to get about.
And presumably a lot cheaper. What sort of savings now are we affording to a couple or a family of four, whatever it might be, Mr. Shapps?
For a family of four, it does get into the hundreds, and it was one of the biggest concerns. We obviously only introduced this as a temporary move because we were concerned about Omicron. We introduced the red list and quite a lot of testing requirements, including some quarantine until you had the result of your PCR, of course. That did give us the opportunity to jab 13 million people with their boosters. So it was not for nothing. But we know that the Omicron spread is universal. So Omicron testing, if you like, has outlived its usefulness really at this stage. And that's why we've removed it.
Knowing that you, the Prime Minister, and your senior colleagues are always guided by the data, what was the data that was provided to make you confident and your colleagues confident to take this decision?
Yeah, simply that very few of the hospital admissions were from people who've been travelling. So we know that Omicron is obviously very real. It's worth saying you're 8 times more likely to end up in hospital if you haven't been coronavirus jabbed. So it's very important to get your jabs. But we've not been seeing, what we've not seen is that if you've been travelling, you're more likely to be in hospital than if you've been here in the UK. So, and I think we beyond where you have an outbreak or a variant of concern, we can't treat the rest of the world as if it's a dangerous place. We are global Britain. We do need to trade. We do need people to be able to visit their friends and family. And so it's right to remove those restrictions, particularly when it comes, and costs when it comes to testing.
And just nuts and bolts on this for my listeners. When does this kick in from, Secretary of State?
From tomorrow, Friday at 4 a.m, you'll no longer need to take a pre-departure test or quarantine when you get home. And just for technical reasons, people need time to be able to book the new type of test. From Sunday at 4 a.m, your test when you come home will switch to being a lateral flow, which you must, of course, purchase in order to put on your pre-departure form before you come back home.
Holiday relief then for some people, possibly as regards half-term. Good luck to them. But as and when they return in a couple of months, they could be faced, to move you to other matters, as delicately as I can, to rising energy bills. Come on, Secretary of State. We've got to cut VAT on those to help those at the bottom end, don't we?
Well, VAT on energy bills is, of course, only at 5% already. So it's not the normal 20%. I think there's a range of different things that we need to do to help. First of all, recognising that the global wholesale gas market has gone through the roof as the world economy has picked up from coronavirus. And so we're doing a bunch of different things, including £500 million household support fund. We've got £140 contribution to 2.2 million of the lowest income households through the warm home discount. We've got cold weather payments of an extra £25 a month, £300 for the winter fuel payments to recipients of the state pensions. So we're doing a lot of different things to try to, you're
doing enough. I mean, some people say, and it is a catchy headline, it will be a choice of heating or eating for some folk. Do you recognise that, Secretary of State?
No, look, we understand that there are significant pressures on cost of living this year. You've got inflation, you've got these wholesale gas price increases as the world wakes up from coronavirus. We are putting in 4.2 billion pounds of decisive action to try to make sure that those who are most likely to be impacted are protected as far as is possible. And I think your listeners understand we live in a global energy market. One of the best things we can do is move away from the reliance on some of these fossil fuels where we're massively impacted by global prices, and we're doing that too.
On that subject, and you rightly cite the spiralling costs, some would suggest it's worth exploring the idea of some kind of levy on some of these energy companies, some kind of windfall tax or additional tax that should be paid to the Treasury. Mr. Shapps.
Well, as ever, I leave all of these things to Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor. I think it's fair to say that energy companies are themselves under significant pressure, and we've seen that some go down every year, but we've seen quite a significant number collapsing. So they're under quite a lot of pressure themselves. We've got massive investment in the future energy stability of this country. So we're already producing over half our energy from renewables, from nuclear. And I think that's really important, that we move away from things like overseas reliance on gas. Actually, interestingly, a lot of this price spike is said to be from Russian gas. We actually buy very little Russian gas. I think it's less than 3% of our supply. But because it's rising elsewhere, the overall costs of energy rises, and we want to be energy independent as possible, and that I think is the right way forward.
Just coming back to the idea of pressure, that leads me into another headline that you might have seen in the Financial Times, and the pressure on people's salaries, their wallets and their purses, and the Prime Minister being pressed to scrap the £12 billion tax rise, the NI as it was called. The revolt, it would appear, possibly being led by Moggy, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Are you going to man the barricades with Moggy, Mr. Shapps?
Well, so, first of all, I absolutely don't get into commenting on discussions in Cabinet. We agree collectively our policy, and our policy is...
Bit of a worry if Moggy is revolting, though, isn't it?
Well, no, our policy is very straightforward, actually, and I think your listeners will approve. First of all, who would not want to sort out the huge backlog in operations and procedures that's built up in the NHS whilst we've been dealing with coronavirus? One. And two, the massive injustice that if you happen to have a certain type of illness, for example, dementia, you can end up having to sell your home to pay for your long-term care. It's completely wrong that just because you have a cruel disease like dementia, you're unable to pass anything on to your next of kin and your successors. And we're ending that through this national insurance rise, as you say. That's our policy. It's what we intend to do. No government has been prepared to tackle this in the past. We are going to do that. And I think in the end, people will say we want our NHS to be able to do the operations, and we want people to be looked after, even if it is long-term care that's required.
Couple of last questions for you. As a senior representative of the government, this is not on your brief, but a puzzling decision, many of my listeners say, down at Bristol, where 4 people who had been accused of acts of vandalism as regards the toppling and subsequent dumping of the statue of Edward Colston, the slave trader, into Bristol Harbour, cleared all crimes by a jury. Puzzled by that, Secretary of State?
Look, first of all, as ever, I never want to sort of comment on an individual court case and a jury. They hold all the facts in front of them. So let's separate that particular issue from the broader point, which is, look, we must live in a society where people can't go around destroying public property and being able to sort of walk away from that. We are introducing, via the police crime sentencing courts bill, new measures which would potentially plug a gap and make it absolutely clear. If you want to take down a statue, if you want to change what's on the public realm, what's displayed, that's absolutely legitimate. I've got no issue with the cause of wanting to change, what represents, your city through statues or anything else. That is done through the ballot box. That is done through petitioning your local councillor. Get yourself elected. Do it the right way. We can't have mob rule as the way forward, and the police crime sentencing courts bill will be looking after that particular aspect of destroying public property.
Final question, as Transport Secretary, you rightly referenced global Britain. Can we look a little bit at London on this one? How urgent is it that we see foreign tourists attracted back to the city to try and bring the economy that the whole country, but certainly London, needs to fuel the economy of the whole of the United Kingdom? Secretary of State.
Massively, massively important, Nick. I was just looking at the figures yesterday. 48.5 billion pounds of income has been lost through coronavirus by tourism not taking place, and a large amount of that will have come to the nation's capital, which I think I'm right in saying before coronavirus was being more visited than Paris. I think that's right. And either way, it's very, very important that we are able to bring tourism back. That's one of the reasons why I've scrapped these many different tests that were required and the costs that were required, necessarily brought in when Omicron was a variant of concern. Now it's everywhere, not required any further. And that's why we've removed it, because it had outlived its usefulness. And I hope it gives tourism a bump start this year.
Grateful for your time. Thanks, Grant Shapps, appearing here on LBC. 2 minutes after 9. Let's get the latest news headlines.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, Novak Djokovic has been told he can stay in Melbourne as he